What you're about to read may send shivers down your spine. Imagine police officers, hardened by years of service, brought to tears by what they encountered. Imagine a family, each member falling victim to a series of mysterious and tragic events. This isn't the plot of a suspense novel. This is a true story, one that revolves around a girl whose life took a dark and horrifying turn. Daisy Coleman was the kind of girl who seemed to have it all: beauty, intelligence, and a wealth of talents. But behind her bright smile and charming demeanor, Daisy carried a deep, unseen burden, one that began weighing on her at an early age. Born on March 30th, 1997, in the small town of Albany, Missouri, Daisy grew up in a loving family. Her father, Michael, was a dedicated doctor, and her mother, Melinda, a caring veterinarian. Together with her 3 brothers, Daisy was the second child in the Coleman family. But tragedy struck in 2009 when a seemingly ordinary trip turned into a nightmare. Daisy, her father, and one of her younger brothers were on their way to a wrestling competition when their car veered off the road and crashed. The accident claimed Michael's life, leaving a gaping hole in the Coleman family. In the aftermath of this loss, Melinda moved the family to Maryville, Missouri, where she shouldered the responsibility of raising her children alone. The Coleman family, still reeling from their devastating loss, could never have imagined the horrors that awaited them. It was the early morning of January 8th, 2012, when 14-year-old Daisy Coleman awoke in the freezing cold, lying in her own front yard. The biting chill of winter had frozen her hair to the ground. Dressed only in a t-shirt and sweatpants, she was barely conscious, her thoughts muddled and her body numb. Daisy's first thought was that she must be dead. She couldn't stand, couldn't call out for help. Her voice was slurred, her words incomprehensible. Tears streamed down her face as she struggled to drag herself to the front door, using what little strength she had left to bang on it with all her might. Inside, Melinda Coleman, Daisy's mother, was sound asleep, but the strange knocking eventually pierced through her dreams. At first, she thought it was just the family dogs, cold and wanting to come inside. Throwing on a robe, she headed for the door, expecting to see her pets. But when she opened it, she was greeted by a sight that made her heart stop. Her daughter, Daisy, lying on the steps, barely clinging to consciousness and reeking of alcohol. Panic set in as Melinda screamed for her sons to come and help. The boys, jolted awake by their mother's cries, rushed downstairs and carried their sister inside. The family was overcome with terror, desperate to warm Daisy with blankets. But as Melinda examined her daughter more closely, she noticed the severe frostbite on Daisy's legs. Acting quickly, she filled the bathtub with cool water and instructed her sons to take Daisy to the bathroom. Once alone with her daughter, Melinda began to undress her, only to discover the horrifying extent of Daisy's injuries. Large bruises and red marks covered her legs. It was at this moment that the full weight of what had happened to Daisy began to sink in. As a veterinarian, Melinda knew how to treat frostbite, and she slowly raised the temperature of the water, trying to warm Daisy's body and bring her back to full consciousness. Thankfully, Daisy began to recover physically, but her speech remained slurred, her thoughts clouded. Fearing the worst, Melinda called 911, and the police soon arrived. They questioned Daisy, but in her disoriented state, she couldn't clearly explain what had happened to her the night before. The police then turned to Paige, Daisy's friend, who had been with her that night and was still at the Coleman house. Paige recounted how the events unfolded. On the evening of January 7, 2012, Daisy had invited her best friend over for a sleepover. The two girls had planned a night of watching horror movies, and for added thrill, they had secretly taken some alcohol from the Coleman's home bar. As the night wore on, Daisy started exchanging messages with Matthew Barnett, a 17-year-old football star and a friend of her older brother. When Matthew suggested they come over to his house for some fun, the girls, caught up in the excitement, agreed. Around 1 in the morning, Daisy and Paige snuck out of the house, slipping through Daisy's bedroom window. They met Matthew and his friends around the corner, and the boys led them to Matthew's house. Quietly, they entered the basement, careful not to wake Matthew's parents, who were asleep upstairs. As soon as Paige and Daisy found themselves in the dimly lit basement, Matthew wasted no time in offering Daisy more alcohol. Paige, feeling a mix of curiosity and unease, watched as her friend downed glass after glass, the liquid slipping down her throat almost without pause. Meanwhile, one of the boys, Nicholas, approached Paige, took her hand, and led her to an adjacent empty room in the basement. In that secluded space, Nicholas initiated sexual intercourse with Paige. Meanwhile, Matthew led Daisy to another room where a large bed awaited them. Through the occasional crack of an opening door, Paige caught glimpses of what was happening to her friend. Daisy was sprawled on the bed, barely conscious, unable to speak or move. Matthew, taking full advantage of her vulnerable state, proceeded to engage in sexual intercourse with her. All the while, his friend Jordan Zetch filmed the entire scene with his smartphone. By 2 o'clock in the morning, the boys decided it was time to head back. They bundled the girls into the car and drove them to Daisy's house. Paige was the first to exit the vehicle. Matthew assured her that Daisy needed to sit outside for a while to sober up and that they would stay with her to ensure she was safe. Trusting them, Paige agreed and went back into the house alone. She climbed through Daisy's bedroom window, collapsed onto the bed, and quickly fell asleep, unaware of the events unfolding outside. Outside, the boys pulled Daisy from the car. She was unsteady on her feet, and her condition quickly worsened as she became violently ill. They removed her shoes, took her purse and phone, and held her hair back as she vomited. Then, without a second thought, they laid Daisy down on the cold ground near her house. Fearing they might be spotted, the boys hastily got back into the car and drove away, leaving Daisy to lie outside in the freezing temperatures for nearly 3 hours. Dressed only in a t-shirt and sweatpants, with no socks or shoes, her wet hair froze to the ground as the bitter cold set in. When the police arrived at the Coleman residence later that morning, they conducted a thorough search of the house and the surrounding yard. In Daisy's room, they found 5 empty bottles of alcohol. Outside, they discovered Daisy's bag, her cell phone, her shoes, and evidence of her having been sick. The police also noted the disturbing details of her condition: numerous bruises on her legs and tears in her groin area. Daisy was rushed to the hospital, where medical examinations confirmed the severity of her injuries. Blood tests revealed that her alcohol level was nearly twice the legal limit. After several hours in the hospital, Daisy finally regained consciousness, but her memory of the previous night was foggy at best. She admitted to sneaking alcohol from the home bar and running off with the boys, but she couldn't recall the details of what had transpired. By 11 a.m. on January 8th, just hours after the incident, law enforcement had tracked down Matthew Barnett, Jordan Zetch, and Nicholas Graumaltis. All 3 were taken into custody for questioning. During his interrogation, Matthew admitted to having sexual relations with Daisy, but insisted that it was entirely consensual. He claimed that when he first met Daisy and Paige that night, they were already intoxicated. Initially, Matthew denied giving Daisy any alcohol, but as the questioning continued, his story began to unravel. Eventually, he confessed to giving her several shots of strong liquor to loosen her up. Matthew also mentioned that he had used a condom during the encounter, which he later disposed of on the way back to Daisy's house. Jordan Zetch, who at first refused to testify, eventually admitted to recording a brief video of Matthew kissing Daisy using Nicholas's phone. The video, which lasted only about 10 seconds, had been shown to a few friends before Jordan, fearing the consequences, deleted it. Nicholas, who had been involved with Paige, was the only one who immediately admitted his guilt. He was subsequently sent to a juvenile detention center. The boy who drove everyone back to Daisy's house recounted that Daisy had been crying the entire ride home, and Matthew had expressed fear that Daisy's brother, Charlie, would kill him if he found out what had happened. Adding another layer of darkness to the story, it was revealed that just days before this horrific night, Matthew had dined peacefully with the Coleman family, sitting at the same table in what seemed like a friendly and warm atmosphere. At 1 p.m. on January 8th, the police conducted a search of Matthew Barnett's basement, hoping to uncover more evidence in this chilling case. Overwhelmed by shame and despair, this tragic post was a stark reminder of the profound and lasting damage such trauma can inflict, not just on the victims, but on everyone around them. 9 days later, Audrey Pott took her own life. The weight of the humiliation and bullying became too much for her to bear. It wasn't until 6 months after her death that her parents were able to initiate a criminal case against the 3 boys involved. The perpetrators received sentences ranging from 30 to 45 days, and their families later paid Audrey's parents around $1 million in compensation for their loss. Let's return to Daisy Coleman. In 2018, hoping to start fresh, Daisy moved to Colorado and took a job at a tattoo parlor. She was also working on a new film project that focused on her journey toward recovery. But in June 2018, tragedy struck again. Daisy's mother, Melinda, and her brother, Tristan, were involved in a car accident while on their way to visit her. Tragically, 19-year-old Tristan did not survive. The circumstances of the accident remain unclear to this day. Following Tristan's death, Daisy posted on social media expressing how each day it became harder for her to keep her inner demons at bay, to force a smile, and to pretend that everything was okay. Despite her grief, Daisy co-founded a charitable organization to support victims of violence. She continued to share her story and offer support to others facing similar struggles. However, she often spoke about how difficult it was for her to manage the overwhelming thoughts that plagued her mind. She struggled with emotional pain, panic attacks, and constant terrible memories. In the summer of 2020, Daisy, then 23, began confiding in friends about a new source of fear. She was being stalked by an unknown man who constantly sent her threats. Desperate for help, Daisy went to the police, filing a report that the man had been following her since December 2019. Her pleas for help, however, went largely unanswered. On Tuesday, August 4th, 2020, Daisy tweeted that she was too afraid to leave her house. She wrote that she couldn't even walk her dog or go to work because of the fear that consumed her. She had lost her appetite and couldn't sleep. Later that day, Daisy posted on Facebook that a man had come to her door and she was terrified. She suspected that this man had previously stolen her keys and might now be able to enter her home. She also revealed that this man had stolen her photos and used them to register on a website, offering intimate services under her name. Alarmed by her daughter's posts, Melinda called the Colorado police, urging them to check on Daisy. At 4 p.m., officers arrived at Daisy's home. She let them in, and they spent about an hour talking with her. Daisy told them about the man who was stalking her, but the officers didn't find anything suspicious in her behavior. However, shortly after the police left, Daisy contacted her boyfriend via video call. During the conversation, she suddenly pulled out a gun, pointed it at herself, and pulled the trigger. Her boyfriend, in shock, didn't immediately grasp what had happened. The connection was cut off, and Daisy stopped responding to his calls. He dialed 911. When the police returned to Daisy's home at 8 p.m., they found her dead. She had suffered a fatal gunshot wound and was lying in a pool of blood. One of the officers broke down in tears at the scene. Daisy Coleman, at just 23 years old, had ended her life. Her mother, Melinda, announced Daisy's death in a heartbreaking post on social media. Melinda revealed that she had fought tirelessly for Daisy's mental health, believing she had done everything she could for her daughter. She also confirmed that Daisy had indeed been stalked in the months leading up to her death, and that, recently, Daisy had discovered she would never be able to have children. After Daisy's death, the tattoo parlor where she worked was broken into. The thief stole an album of Daisy's exclusive sketches and her tattoo machine. 4 months later, in December 2020, Melinda Coleman, now 58, posted another deeply emotional tribute to her daughter on social media. Soon after, Melinda took her own life in the same manner as Daisy. With Melinda's death, only 2 sons remained in the Coleman family, the older Charlie and the younger Logan. The charitable organization that Daisy had co-founded organized a fundraiser to support the boys in the aftermath of their loss. Meanwhile, Matthew Barnett's life continued to flourish. After the deaths of Daisy and Melinda, he publicly expressed sympathy for the tragedy that had befallen the Coleman family. He stated, "I hope that Daisy's story will be the impetus for change in our society. We must create a world where no child suffers from violence, where every voice is heard and every victim receives support and justice." If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss out on our latest content. We dive into the most intriguing and shocking crime stories each week, and your support means the world to us. Until next time, stay safe and take care of yourself. See you in the next video.